In this second lecture of week 2, we are going to discuss some of the descriptive ways to analyze the energy demand. So when we talk about energy demand can be analyzed in various ways. So we are talking about three ways of that. One is the descriptive analysis, within which we will be discussing about growth rate, energy intensity, and the concept of elasticity. In the next lecture, we are going to talk about decomposition analysis, and in the final lecture of this week, we are going to talk about the parametric approach that can be employed in order to understand the energy demand. So let us begin with the descriptive analysis. We start with the concept of growth rate, which is very important to understand the energy demand. You must have come across different figures that newspapers and different articles keep on mentioning what is the rate at which the energy demand is growing, and when the stock of fossil fuel will be able to support that amount of growth in energy demand. It also talks about the growth in the emission that is coming as a result of the use of energy and so on. So growth rate is one of the very important indicators, and this is probably the first thing that you report when you are talking about increase or decrease of any probably various concepts, especially in case of energy demand. But growth rate is not a single concept. There are different types of growth rate that you can think about, and we are here going to discuss about two such growth rates. The first one is a very simple one. This is the total growth or year to year growth rate. So you think about one initial time period and you think about one terminal time period, and you try to understand what is the total growth over this period of time. So if you look at this formulation, you see that we are denoting this growth rate as G, and we are writing this as Et minus E naught divided by E naught. So this is the point at the end. So this is the terminal time point or the final time point at, or you can say this is the energy demand at the final time point. This is the energy demand at the beginning, and E naught is the energy demand at the beginning. You multiply this by 100 and you get the growth rate in percentage. So this is fairly simple. The next rate of growth that we can consider is the average annual rate of growth. This is also again represented by G. Now this, we can think about this formula Et, that is the terminal energy demand, is equal to E naught, that is the initial energy demand, plus 1 plus G to the power T. So your energy demand is growing at the rate G, so that the initial demand becomes if the initial demand is E naught and it grows at the rate of G, then at some terminal point this becomes E naught. From this equation you can derive what is the expression for G, and that is going to be Et divided by E naught whole to the power 1 by T minus 1. So let us have a quick look at how we are deriving this particular formula, or what do we exactly understand by average annual growth rate. See, this is simply not, if you are thinking about a time period of 10 years, you cannot simply divide this G by 10 and say that that is the average annual growth rate. It's a complete different formula of compounding altogether. And let us have spent some 2-3 minutes to understand where the formula comes from. We take a simple example of putting some money in the bank. This is easier if you take this because this is familiar to all of us. Suppose I have 1000 rupees, I want to keep it in the bank, and the bank gives me an interest rate of 5%. So this is, in fact, what I am saying is that I have some money which is growing at the rate of 5%. So I know that this G is actually 5% or 0.05. So at the initial period, time point t equal to 0, the amount of money that I have is m naught, which is equal to 1000. Once I keep this money for 1 year in the bank, it has grown at the rate of 5%. So how much money do I have? I basically have, after 1 year, I basically have 1000. So this is the initial amount that I had, plus 1000 multiplied by 0.05. So there is an accrual of 5% rate of interest. This is the growth. This is representing the growth. So if I take 1000 common from this expression, I get 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.5. So this is the amount of money that I have at the end of the first year. What will happen at the end of the second year? See, at the end of the second year, I already had M1. This money I have intact. So this is 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.5. In addition to that, what do I have? In addition to that, I have a 5% interest accrual to M1. So this is my M1 and this is the 5% of M1. So the total money that I have after 2 years is 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.05 plus 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 1.05, and the second part is multiplied by 0.05 again, because the interest is accruing on this part. So again, if I take 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.05 common, then what I am left with is 1.0.05. So if I simplify it a bit, I can see that at the end of the second year, the amount of money that I have after this 5% compound annual rate of growth, 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.05 whole square. So at the end of the time period 2, the power of this term 1 plus g is going to be 2. Similarly, at the end of the third year, you will see this will remain 1000 multiplied by 1 plus the rate of growth to the power 3. So if we generalize it, after some time period, so at t equal to capital T, that is, if this is capital T is my terminal point of time, the amount of money that I have, the bank gives me back, is MT, which is the initial amount, that is 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.05. So the initial amount multiplied by 1 plus the rate of growth, whole to the power, not whole to the power, whole to the power, I mean 1 plus 0.05 whole to the power t, that is the time point. So this is essentially m naught multiplied by 1 plus the rate of growth to the power t. If you come here, you see that is exactly what is happening. So ET is the final amount of money that you are getting at the end of the term. E naught is your initial investment. So this is the initial value, which is 1000 in your example. 1 plus g is 0.05 here, and t is the number of years that you are keeping the money for. So this formula actually tells you that the energy demand is growing at the rate g. If that is the case, then after a point of time at t equal to capital T, your energy demand is going to become E naught multiplied by 1 plus g whole to the power t, and from that you are deriving the value of g, which is like this. And you can check, we'll actually check with an example, that this g is not equal to this particular g divided by t. So these two are two very different concepts, and this is one of the common mistakes that people tend to do when they are deriving the average annual growth rate. So this is something you need to be careful about. Let us now try to explore the implication of these growth rates with the help of some numerical examples. So this table actually tells you the yearly consumption of different types of fuel in India over the period 2007-8 to 2015-16. And we will be discussing about the growth in demand for coal. So the first question that we are going to address, what is the growth in coal consumption in India during 2014-15 and 2015-16? So see, here we are actually talking about the year-on-year growth rate. So this is the growth in consumption over one year. So how do we calculate that? This is clearly the growth, this is clearly the demand that you have in the year 2015-16 minus the demand that you have in the year 2014-15 divided by the demand of 2014-15. So you can relate it to this particular formula, ET minus E naught divided by E naught. And this gives you a very low percentage of increase, which is 0.58% of increase. If you ask me now what is the total growth in coal consumption during the period 2007-8 to 2015-16. So here the concept is pretty much same. Only your initial year will change. Only the value of E naught is going to change. Instead of having 1, 2, 4, 5, 3 as the initial year, now we are going to change the initial year to 2007-8. So your initial demand is 7608. So the total growth that you have, the growth in demand that you have over this period 2007-8 to 2015-16 is 12660 minus 7608 divided by 7608. So there is a 66% increase in demand over this particular period of time. And here also we are making use of this particular formula. The next question actually relates to average annual growth rate and what we are doing there. Here the question is, okay, we understand that there is a total growth of 66% in demand during this period. What is the average annual rate of growth? So this is something that we were discussing in the previous slide, which was analogous to this 5% rate of interest. So what is the average annual rate of growth? Here what we are doing, we are relating to this particular formula. So we are using this formula where G is equal to, see, this is the terminal demand, that is, this is ET, divided by you have E naught, the whole thing to the power 1 by 8 minus 1. So we are using this particular formula to understand what is the growth rate, and we get that the average annual growth rate is 6.57. So 2 points of caution. Once again, you should not divide 66 by the number of year to get the average annual growth rate. It's a different formula altogether. And the second thing is that, see, when we are choosing the value of t, this is 8. But if you see how many years are here, this is actually 9. So if you have information on 9 years, then your t will be equal to 8 because the growth is taking place for 8 years. And you see here what we are doing, we are saying E naught, we are not starting from E1. We are putting the power as capital T when we are starting with 0, right? E0 to ET. Therefore, the T that you are using should not be 9, but the T that you are using should be 8. So these are the 2 points of caution that you have to maintain when you are calculating the average annual growth rate. Now, one interesting exercise could be, here we have discussed about the coal, but you can try to calculate the average annual growth rates for the consumption of the rest of the fuel for India and try to understand for which fuel the growth rate is higher and for which fuel the growth rate is lower. And it will also be interesting to understand whether the growth rate is increasing or declining over time for a particular fuel and what could be the reasons behind that. Is it some economic reason? Is it the case that the price is changing for that particular fuel, or are there some environmental concerns? So is it the case that there is a particular fuel is causing a lot of pollution and the other is not? So what is going on behind that? So these are the interesting things to study when you think about the growth in energy demand, or you can compare the growth of energy demand in terms of various fuels. The second concept that comes handy when you are talking about the analysis of energy demand is the concept of energy intensity. Now, what is energy intensity? Energy intensity is basically the amount of energy that you use to produce a particular amount of output. So this is energy input divided by output. Again, depending on the data that you have or depending on the work that you are going to carry out, there are various ways in which you can measure energy intensity. So there is no one single way to measure energy intensity. The first one, this is, let us call it E1. This is not some universal thing, but we are just referring this to as E1. This is total energy used in physical units divided by total output produced in physical units. What does that mean? That means that I am measuring both energy and output in terms of their physical units. So I am saying kilowatt hour of energy required to produce 1 ton of steel. So both energy and the steel, they are measured in their own physical units. If you look at this is a very technical way of measurement. And when the engineers do the measurement, when the engineering, in the engineering literature, you come across the concept of energy intensity, this is how things are measured. But sometimes what happens, you may be interested in questions like, what is the energy intensity of the manufacturing sector in India? The moment you say what is the energy intensity of the manufacturing sector in India, you cannot restrict yourselves to steel only. You have cement, you have fertilizer, you have chemical and so on. So there is a range of output that you are taking into consideration. But unfortunately, you cannot add 1 ton of coal with 1 ton of cement, and that too with 1 ton of fertilizer, to get the value of the denominator, because they have different implications. In that case, what do? We just convert the denominator in the value of output. So instead of saying what is the physical amount of output produced, which is kind of impossible to depict in this kind of a situation, we say what is the value of output produced. So if there are X ton of steel produced, we will convert them into the value of steel by multiplying them by the market price. If there are Y ton of cement that is being produced, we will multiply it by the market price of cement and convert it to the value of cement produced. So now if you think about the manufacturing sector, each of the separate industries and their outputs, they are being converted to the monetary values. So now everything is measured in terms of the rupees. So the value of output in the steel industry is X rupees. The value of output produced in the cement industry is Y rupees. And you can add up all these rupees. However, you can still keep the energy used in physical units, because with the energy, the good thing is that we have already, when we were discussing about the measurement, we have already come across the conversion factors. So even if you have different forms of energy, different forms of fuel, you can take out the heat content of that fuel and convert everything to something like, kilowatt hour, or it can be gigajoule, or whatever you come across. So it's possible to represent all energy in a single physical unit. However, for the output, we have changed everything to price, everything to the value of output. So once you move on from the E1 to E2 kind of an indicator, you really lose some sort of, kind of specifications that you had in case of E1. So some specifications are lost here. However, you are being able to add some more new information as well, because as I said, I mean, for the entire industry or for the manufacturing sector, you will never be able to come up with an indicator such as E1. So as you move towards aggregation, there are ways how you can lose the nitty-gritties, and you add more information by adding more macro figures. So this is the movement from E1 to E2. However, there might also be cases, and this is mainly because of the data constraint, you don't have the energy use data in physical units for all kind of industries or all kind of sectors in an economy. This is a little bit of difficult data to gather, because for this you really need to get this data from the industry itself, for the production unit itself. Instead of doing that, what is the easier way to do it? See, these all are commercial energy. So everything is being bought and sold in the market, if you think about that only. So if I ask you what is the energy intensity of GDP, then I may not get the information on physical energy use for every sector of the economy. But what I can come to know is that what is the value of transaction that went on in the place. So we can think about a measure like this, where we are dividing the total energy expenditure by the total value of output. So this is, again, you are losing some specification here, but again, for if you think about a macro indicator like energy intensity of GDP, this is probably more useful, and this is probably more representative, because there are various sectors in the economy for which you will not be able to get data on E1, you will not be able to get data on E2, because you don't have access to data on total energy use in physical units. But what you have data on, what is the volume of or the value of market transaction. Now there is no clear distinction between E1, E2 and E3, and there is no guideline when you should choose one over the other. It depends on various things. It depends on what kind of data is available to you. It depends on what kind of analysis you want to do. Suppose, as I said, if you want to understand the energy intensity of the entire manufacturing sector of a country, then you can't use, it's impossible to use E1. And there is no reason why you should E3 if you have data on energy consumption in physical units. So it depends on the purpose of your study that you are carrying out, and it also depends on the availability of data. One more thing we just would like to take a note of, here we are talking about energy intensity. So this is energy use divided by output produced. The other thing which is very important concept is called energy productivity, right? So this is basically the reciprocal, and this is related to the concept of energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is just reciprocal to energy intensity. Higher the energy intensity, lower will be the energy productivity, and lower will be energy efficiency. Lower the energy efficiency, higher will be the energy productivity, and higher will be the energy efficiency. So sometimes we get a little bit confused between these three concepts, but this is the relationship between them. And all these three concepts are used when we are talking about the energy demand. In fact, in the next, in the next lecture, when we discuss about decomposition analysis, you will see that we actually talk a lot about energy efficiency and actually energy intensity, but it also talks about energy efficiency. Before we go to the next one, there is a quick question. If you can find out from sources, what is the energy intensity of GDP in India? And you can actually track the energy intensity of India over a period of time and just check whether there is a decline or not, whether it's declining, whether it's increasing, or whether it's staying constant. There is a quick look at the decline in the energy intensity trends in some of the energy intensive industries in India. So this is the data on a work that we carried out at some years ago, and all the basic industries, all the the energy intensive industries are there. There is aluminium. This is a part of here you have aluminium. You have ammonia fertilizer industry. These two actually correspond to the production of cement. This is the thermal power in production of clinker, and this is the electricity produced to manufacture in the next stage, that is the cement production. Then you have the production of steel, and this is the production of paper. And in all these industries, what we have observed that the energy intensity of these industries has come down a lot over the years. During past 20-30 years, it has come down a lot, and for many of the industries you can see they are very close to the world average. So for example, cement, if you think about cement, Indian production of cement, the energy intensity of the cement producing industries in India is one of the world best. It's also true in case of fertilizer production. It's also true, aluminium is also close. Maybe paper is not so close. So if you do this kind of an analysis to understand what is the trend of energy intensity, this actually tells you where is the scope for policy intervention. So you see, if you think about cement, it's already close to the world best. It's already close to the benchmark that you can say. So, but if you think about paper, there is a clear difference in terms of what is world best and where India is operating at. So probably there is more scope for policy intervention in the paper industry in order to increase the rate of decline of energy intensity, or to see how we can actually achieve the world best. And this is a very important thing, because you are talking about the energy intensive industries. So a lion's share of energy consumption is actually going to these particular industries, and to manage their demand is one of the biggest agenda of the government. In later lectures, we'll explore what are the different policies that the government is actually taking in order to do that. So there are few quick questions on growth rate and energy intensity combined together. So this is the scenario that we are talking about. So the fact is that in Paris Agreement, India has committed a reduction of emission intensity of GDP. So notice, this is not the energy intensity, but this is the emission intensity of GDP by 30 to 35% by 2030 over 2005. Let us assume, so this is a strong assumption, but this is only for the analytical purpose. This is some kind of a back of the envelope calculation. Let us assume that this, in order to achieve this 30 to 35% decline in emission intensity of GDP, India requires to reduce the energy intensity by 35% over the same period of time. So the situation is that India has to reduce the energy intensity of its GDP by 30% by 2030 over 2005. So this is the scenario. Now the question is, which energy intensity measure do you think will be the most appropriate here? So you had three options, E1, E2 and E3. In case of E1, both energy use as well as the production, they are measured in physical quantities. In case of E2, the energy use was measured in physical quantities, whereas for the denominator we use the value of output. And in case of E3, we used the value in case of both numerator and denominator. And as a result, this is one quick comment. You can see that the measure E3 for energy intensity, this becomes unit free because both the numerator and denominator, they are measured in terms of rupees or the monetary units. So the question is, what is going to be the most appropriate measure here? I would say it's going to be E2 because you may have data on the physical units of energy consumption and you don't have to convert it to value. So if you have data on E1, go for that. If you have data on E2, then you go for that. If you don't have data on E1 or E2, then it's better to go for E3. The second question is, India produced 1146 billion US dollar worth of output in 2005, and the energy consumption in 2005 was 3,61,098 kiloton of oil equivalent. So what is the energy intensity? If you take E2, you will see that the energy intensity is 35 kiloton of oil equivalent per billion US dollar. I would like to pay you a little bit of attention here at the unit of measurement of energy intensity. Here the unit of measurement is kiloton of oil equivalent per billion US dollar. So in case of E1, it would have been, kiloton of oil equivalent per ton of production of something, but this is billion US dollar. This calculation you can do and you can come up with. The next question is, if you have to reduce the energy intensity by 30% over a period of, from 2005 to 2030, that is over a period of 25 years, what is going to be your target energy intensity? So again, you can do the calculation and check whether it's matching with this answer or not. If you have to reduce the energy intensity by 35% over a period of 25 years, it has to become 205 kiloton of oil equivalent per billion US dollar. So this is your target energy intensity to be achieved. The final question, this takes into account the average annual rate of growth. The question is, what should be the target average annual rate of reduction of energy intensity? And this takes you to the formula where you use that the average annual rate of growth is a function of the initial and the terminal year and also the time period that you are considering. So a quick hint that is given, you can calculate it in this way, and this should give you an answer that the average annual rate of decline to reach 315 kTOE per billion US dollar to 205 kTOE per billion US dollar, you have to have a reduction rate of 1.7% per annum. So one quick observation, when you are doing this calculation, your G comes with a minus sign, because here we are not considering the increase in energy intensity, we are considering a reduction in the energy intensity. So you have 1 minus G to the power 25 multiplied by 315, which should give you a value of 1.7%. So this was the discussion on energy intensity and the growth rate. The third topic that we said we'll cover under this analytical tools is the concept of elasticity. And this actually takes us back to the discussion that we had in the previous lecture on how you actually determine the demand for energy for consumers as well as for the producers. Let us have a quick look at the theoretical understanding of elasticity. We have already said that we can link the idea of elasticity with the slope of the demand curve. So the slope of the demand curve tells you what is the change in the quantity demanded when there is a change in the price of that particular product, and we are going to bring that concept in here. So elasticity is basically a measure of percentage change in demand when there is 1% change in price or in income. Now I am generally saying price, this can be the price of different commodities that we are going to discuss here. Let us begin with the concept of own price elasticity. So this is a case where we are trying to understand what is the change in energy demand if there is a change in energy price, other things remaining constant. So this own price elasticity, this is a percentage change in demand due to percentage change in price. So the numerator here captures the percentage change in quantity demanded. So this is dQ1 divided by Q1, and the numerator here captures dQ1 by Q1, and the denominator captures dP1 P1. So this is the percentage change in demand and this is the percentage change in price. Now this kind of formulation is possible when you have a continuous demand curve with you and you have a continuous framework. However, if you do not have a continuous framework, in a discrete analysis you can also calculate the own price elasticity in this manner. So instead of del Q, what you have Q11 minus Q1 naught. So this is the change in demand, this is Q1 naught, and here you have the change in price, that is P, the delta P. So this is delta Q, this is delta P. And see, the problem in case of a discrete framework is that what do you take as Q1 or P1, because you have two data points. So instead of taking one particular data point, the best way is to take the average of Q11 and Q1 naught, and for the price to take the average of P11 and P1 naught. So it looks as follows. So this is suppose your demand curve for energy. You have plotted energy here and this is the price. So this gives you the correspondence between energy price and energy demand. Suppose the price of energy falls from P1 naught to P11. So this is delta P1. This is the change in the price. As a result, the quantity demanded changes from Q1 naught to Q11. So this is delta P1 and this is delta Q1. And this is your initial price, this is your terminal price. Here you have, this is your initial quantity and this is your terminal quantity. Now the question is, what is the elasticity of demand if you think about this particular demand curve? So what we do here is that you can take, you can see this is the delta, this is basically delta Q. So you put the value of delta Q1 here. You put the value of delta P1 here, which is this, and then you take the average of the initial and terminal quantity, and here you take the average of the initial and terminal price. So this should be able to tell you what is the own price and elasticity of energy demand for a particular consumer. It can be the producer or it can be the consumer. Now the question is what kind of, you see here, okay, so one point to notice here is that since your demand curve is negatively sloped, the value of elasticity will also be negative, because see the change in price, it's from higher to lower. So P11 minus P1 naught, this is going to give you a negative quantity, whereas Q11 minus Q1 naught, this is going to give you a positive quantity. So when you do the calculation, it should come with a negative sign. So own price elasticity for most of the commodities come with a negative sign. So if there is an increase in price, there will be a decline in the quantity demanded. So what kind of questions are answered with the help of the concept of price elasticity? They are like this. Suppose I ask the question, and these are very important policy questions. What does consumers' demand for LPG, how does the consumers' demand for LPG change when the price of LPG goes up by 1%? Or you can say, what is the change in the consumer demand of LPG where the price of LPG goes down by 1%? Now, why is it a very important policy question? Because in countries like India, LPG is highly subsidized. So if you want to increase the subsidy on LPG, that will have an implication on price. That will eventually reduce the price of LPG. Now, why is there a subsidy on LPG? Because we want there should be higher uptake of LPG, and that should replace the traditional fuel that are used for the cooking and which are has a lot more kind of indoor air pollution. Now, if that is the case, if I want to give the subsidy in order to reduce the price, I need to understand what is the repercussion on the demand. So is the demand really responsive to price? So is the elasticity high or is it not so high? See, if the elasticity of demand is not so high, then only by giving subsidy it will not be possible to increase the uptake of LPG. If the elasticity of demand is high, then by giving subsidy and therefore reducing the price, the government can actually penetrate a lot of LPG uptake in the whole system. The second kind of question, which is also very important, this is about the producers. How does producers' demand for coal change in response to 1% change in coal price for some reason, for example, the coal cess? So what is coal cess? Coal cess is basically the price that one has to pay for using the coal. So some additional money that you are paying for using the coal on the top of the market price of coal. Why is it so? Because coal is a polluting, it's a polluting fuel as compared to the rest of the fuel, and therefore you are collecting this money to adjust for that pollution. Now that this is going to increase the, so why is this coal cess imposed? The logic is that if coal cess is imposed, then the price of coal is going to go up, and therefore the producers will be discouraged to use the coal. Now this is true only if the own price elasticity of coal is very high. Then only by inserting this cess in the whole process, one can reduce or one can expect a greater reduction in the demand for coal. However, if the coal demand is not so responsive, that is if the elasticity is not so high, then even after imposition of coal cess, you may not expect too much of decline in the demand for coal. So these are the kind of questions that are addressed through the concept of own price elasticity. Now, as I said that it is very important to understand whether the demand is elastic or inelastic. So, if there is a price change, whether there's going to be high responsiveness in terms of demand or not. To understand that, let us look at this scale. So, this is a scale which starts from 0 and goes to any positive number. This is the scale for elasticity. Now, let us begin at the point 0. So, what is happening at point 0? If you look at this formula for own price elasticity, it says that this dq1 is equal to 0 or this del q1 is equal to 0. So, this says even if there is a change in price, there is going to be no change in demand, because the change in demand is equal to 0, which is leading to the own price elasticity to be equal to 0. So this is the situation where you have absolutely inelastic demand. So when do you have absolutely inelastic demand? When something is very necessary to you. So even if the price increases, you do not change the quantity demanded, or sometimes you are saturated with the use of that particular commodity. So even if the price declines, you do not increase the consumption of that particular commodity. So when you have the quantity exactly that you want to use with you, then there is kind of less responsiveness in terms of demand, even if there is a change in the price. The second part, this is actually very interesting. This is the unit elastic demand. What is unit elastic demand? Here the own price elasticity is equal to 1. That means that the percentage change in price will be exactly equal to the percentage change in demand. So if there is 1% change in price, it will lead to 1% change in demand. Now, if that is the case, one quick thing to reconcile, and you can think about it later. If 1% increase in price leads to 1% reduction in demand, you can imagine that the expenditure remains constant. So 1% increase in price is reducing your demand by 1%. So the expenditure actually remains constant. So unit elastic demand also implies that your expenditure, there is a constant expenditure. If the value is more than 1, anyway we are talking about the this is basically we are talking about the absolute value of elasticity. That is why we are not going beyond 0. So we are not taking any minus sign. So this will come with a minus sign, but what we are discussing here is the absolute value of elasticity. So as we move on from 1 to the higher value of elasticity, we move on to the elastic demand region. So what is happening here? If the demand is elastic, then 1% increase in price will lead to more than 1% reduction in demand. So then you have elastic demand curve. So when will that kind of situation happen? This is a situation where you have a lot of unsatiated demand. If you want to consume a lot of one particular form of energy, however the price is restrictive. So if there is a reduction in price, suddenly your demand goes up a lot. So 1% decline in price will lead to more than 1% increase in demand. So this is the elastic zone. Now what we are going to do, we are going to discuss a couple of examples to understand what are the implications of inelastic, elastic and unit elastic demand curve, and what are the other concepts of demand. So okay, this is a small exercise that you can do. We already have discussed about this utility function. This is the Cobb-Douglas utility function. where you have Q1 is your energy consumption to the power 0.6 and Q2 is your consumption for pizza to the power 0.4, and you solved for the equilibrium, and you also kind of drawn what is going to be the demand curve for Q1 and Q2. So here the task is that you have to derive the price elasticity, the own price elasticity of demand for both the commodities Q1 and Q2. And the hint is that you can start from the equation of the demand curve. Before we move on to the examples that I have mentioned, we can have a quick look at the other concepts of elasticity. There are two more concepts. So this own price elasticity we have already discussed. So there are two more concepts. One is called the cross price elasticity and the other is income elasticity. So what is cross price elasticity? We are still interested in the change in the demand of energy. So we are taking del Q divided by Q1. However, we are no longer interested in the change of price of energy. We are considering the change of price of any commodity other than energy. So your J is not equal to 1. This is the cross price elasticity. So what kind of questions do we address with the help of cross price elasticity? How does consumers' demand for LPG change when price of kerosene goes up by 1%? So think about a household who is using both kerosene and LPG as cooking fuel. Now the price of kerosene goes up by 1%. What is going to be the impact on the use of LPG? Or think about a producer. For the producer, the question is, how does the demand for natural gas change in response to 1% increase in coal price? So you are thinking about the cross repercussion. You are considering the change in price in one commodity and you are talking about the demand change with respect to the other commodity. The final one is the concept of income elasticity. What happens in case of income elasticity? Sometimes if we have more money, we tend to buy something more, and if you have, this may also happen that if you have more money, you buy something less, right? So this is the concept of income elasticity. If your income goes up by 1%, what is going to be the repercussion on the demand of a particular fuel? So for example, we started with the example of the electric vehicle. Probably if the income level goes up, then you may think about using electricity as your fuel for mobility, and you discard petrol as your fuel for mobility. But that can be determined by your level of income. So this is the responsiveness of demand to change in income. In next few slides, what we are going to do, we are going to talk about a couple of examples which are related to these concepts. So the examples go on like this. We spend a little, maybe some time to understand what are there in the rows. So different columns say different things. So the first column, first and second column, here what we are saying, what happens if own price increases, other factors remaining constant. And below this, we are going to state the events that we are interested in. So what happens if own price increases? The second is, here we are talking only about the direction, whether something is changing or it's not changing. Here we are talking about the magnitude. So we are saying if there is 1% increase in price, what is the impact on the demand? Next column we are saying that, okay, now we know what is the change in price, we know what is the change in quantity demanded, so what is the implication for total expenditure? And depending on these previous information, can we come up with some commodity type and can we comment on the elasticity? So we begin with this particular example. Demand for fuel wood for cooking in a very poor household. So what happens to the demand of fuel wood for cooking in a very poor household if the price of fuel wood increases? So imagine you have to set the context. So you have to understand the context. There is no one specific answer to this question, right? So the context is defined by the fact that it's a very poor household and they cannot afford to move upward to the energy ladder. So if they stop using fuel wood because the price has increased, they can't move on to, for example, LPG. So that option is not available. So even if there is change in price, you can assume there is hardly any change in the demand for fuel wood in this pure household for cooking. So what is the impact on demand if there is 1% change in price? You can think that the change in demand is almost zero. So if that is the situation, that change in demand is zero, even if there is a change, even if there is an increase in the price of fuel wood, you are actually positioned here. So this is the absolute inelastic demand where your elasticity is equal to zero because the change in demand is equal to zero. Or you can say that it might change the demand a little bit, so it might lower the demand, but not, the magnitude is not going to be high. So anyway, it will not lead to, so 1% increase in price will never lead to the fall in demand in more than 1%, because this fuel wood is kind of a necessary commodity for this particular household and you don't have any cheap substitute available. So what is the implication on energy expenditure? See, the percentage increase in P1 is greater than the percentage decrease in Q1. So I repeat, the percentage increase in P1 is greater than the percentage decrease in Q1, and therefore P multiplied by Q, that is your expenditure on cooking fuel, is going to go up because the increase dominates the decline, right? If this kind of we are talking about this kind of a commodity, we call it a necessary good. So in case of a necessary good, you typically see inelastic demand curve, which is or you can actually have absolutely inelasticity in demand, where elasticity is equal to own price elasticity is equal to zero. So this helps you to understand what kind of policy will work here. So in order to discourage the use of fuel wood in a particular region which is really poor, one cannot think about increasing the price of fuel wood. That is not going to help. Coming to the second example. This is an urban household, middle income urban household, and we are talking about the demand for LPG there when the own price increases. So the LPG price increases, what is happening to the demand for LPG? See, here you can think that the quantity demanded, the LPG demand may decrease, because this is a middle income household. They also have the option of using kerosene, right? So the moment the LPG price goes up, they can switch a part of cooking from LPG to kerosene. Now if that is the case, then if you think that 1% increase in the price of LPG is going to lead to a decline in LPG by 1%, then you are here. This is the uniquely elastic. The demand is uniquely elastic and the value of elasticity is equal to 1. What happens to the expenditure? The expenditure remains constant. So there is no change in the expenditure. So probably the household actually sets aside some X amount of money per month in order to spend on LPG. So if LPG price goes up by 1%, they reduce the consumption of LPG by 1%. So this remains, the expenditure remains constant. So what kind of commodity is that? This kind of energy commodity, they are neither necessary nor luxury. There is a little bit of flexibility in the demand, but there is not very high flexibility in demand. And in this case, if the change, both the changes are by 1%, then you have uniquely elastic demand curve that you are situated here. Coming to the third example. Here we are considering the demand for petrol for private car in a middle income household. So demand for petrol, this is definitely for the mobility service, and what happens if the price of petrol goes up by 1%. See, there is much cheaper alternative available if you think about the private vehicles. There are public transport system available. If there is actually I should say that if there is a well functioning public transport sector available, then increase in the demand for petrol, increase in the price of petrol may lead to a high decline in the demand for petrol, because you have some very cheap alternative. You can switch to, so for example, I was taking the car every day to my office. The moment the price of petrol goes up, I can decide, okay, I'm going to take the car for 3 days, and for rest of the 3 days I'm just going to use the public transport, or the demand may become zero. So if you think about the household who is a low middle income household, they can kind of tend to stop using the car because there is a hike in the petrol price. This may not go exactly to zero, but this may tend to be close to zero. Now if the demand, so you can see that this 1% increase in price of petrol leads to more than 1% decline in the demand for petrol. So the demand for petrol in this context is highly responsive. What happens in case of energy expenditure? Because 1% increase in price is leading to more than 1% decline in energy, your energy expenditure tends to go down. What kind of good do we call it? It's usually called a luxury good. So even if you stop the consumption, even if you reduce the consumption drastically, there is not a big impact on your quality of life. So this kind of commodity is called a luxury good. And what is the value of elasticity? So the value of elasticity tends to be somewhere here. So the value of elasticity is going to be very, very high and far away from 1. It may also tend to infinity. So the 10 to infinity, when do you actually get it to 10 to infinity? Where the value suddenly declines a lot as compared to the change in price. Okay, the next one is about cross price elasticity of demand. So here we are considering the change in price of one particular type of fuel, and we will talk about the change in demand in the other type of fuel. So the first example is about demand for LPG for cooking if price of electricity or kerosene increases. So we are considering the price of electricity or kerosene, and we are considering the demand for LPG. So if the cross price elasticity, so if the demand for LPG for cooking increases when the price of electricity or kerosene increases, then we say that kerosene and LPG are substitutes. So what is the channel? What is the form? I mean, what is the channel through which this mechanism is working? It's basically like this. So suppose the price of kerosene increases. If the price of kerosene increases, the demand for kerosene will go down. If the demand for kerosene goes down and this reduced demand is met by LPG, then you see that you can use either LPG or kerosene for your cooking purpose, and your budget allows you to do that. So kerosene and LPG are considered to be substitute. If you think about a high income household, then we are saying if the LPG price goes up, then the household is consuming more of electricity. Why? Because the LPG price has gone up, the LPG demand has gone down, and this vacuum that is created in the demand for cooking fuel is being met by electricity. So therefore LPG and electricity, they are substitutes. So the cross price elasticity, the sign of cross price elasticity actually tells you whether two different types of fuels are substitutes or are they complements or they unrelated. So if you see that the cross price elasticity is positive, then you know that the two fuels are substitutes. In the second example, we are saying that demand for electricity in cement plant if price of coal increases. Now this is a little bit of tricky. So we are considering the demand for electricity and the price for coal. Now you have to understand that coal and electricity are used at two different stages of production of cement. So when clinker is being produced from limestone, it's basically the coal which is used. When from clinker cement is being produced, then you are using electricity. So if the price of electricity goes, or if the price of coal goes up and the industry reduces the use of coal, that means less amount of clinker is being produced. If less amount of clinker is being produced, then your consumption of electricity to produce cement from clinker also goes down. So in this kind of a production process, you see that the cross price elasticity is negative. So when the price of coal goes up, your demand for electricity goes down. So the negative cross price elasticity is actually telling you that in the process of production of cement, electricity and coal are complements. Coming to the last example, this is where we are discussing about the demand for natural gas. It's basically a feedstock demand. The demand for natural gas in the fertilizer industry if the price of fuel wood goes up. Now, if the price of fuel wood goes up, probably it's not going to affect the fertilizer industry anyway. So these two are unrelated commodities, and in this kind of a situation, you are likely to get that the cross price elasticity is equal to or close to zero. So the change in price of one type of fuel is not affecting the demand of any other type of fuel. So these three examples actually clarify how you can use the sign and the magnitude of cross price elasticity to understand the relationship between different fuel types. The final one that we are going to discuss are two examples from which makes use of the concept of income elasticity of energy demand. The first example, here we say, suppose the income of a particular family increases, then what happens to the demand of kerosene as a cooking fuel? See, if you think about the range of cooking fuel from, starting from fuel, cow dung, biomass based fuel to kerosene to LPG, then kerosene is sort of an inferior form of cooking fuel. So the moment your income increases, probably you tend to move towards LPG and then towards electricity. So when income increases, the demand for kerosene as cooking fuel is likely to decline. If that is the case, so if the demand for a particular fuel decreases when the price of that particular if the demand for a particular fuel decreases when the money income increases, then this is called an inferior commodity. So the inferior good is something from which you always want to shift away, right? So your elasticity value is negative. On the other hand, if you take the example of LPG as a cooking fuel, now if your income increases, probably your consumption of LPG also increases, because you are moving away from kerosene and you are going towards LPG. So this will give a positive value for income elasticity, and this kind of commodity is called a normal good, and this fuel is kind of a normal fuel that we call. Now, one has to be really careful about the context. I mean, it's not that empirically everywhere you will find a positive income elasticity for LPG. If you think about a very well-to-do household who can afford to buy, sort of an induction oven and all induction oven usable crockery, then they can move away from LPG and can move on towards electricity. In that case, if your money income increases, you may have a situation where your demand for LPG is actually declining instead of increasing. So it all depends on the context. So that is where comes the useful of empirical study. This is what theory tells us, and then when you have empirical data, then you make use of that empirical data to understand whether this is in line with the theory. If yes, then why, and if not, then why. So this is the end of the discussion on energy intensity, growth rate, and on elasticity, three very important analytical frameworks that we use. And here some of the review questions are there. I'm just going to briefly discuss about you, but this is more like a food for thought. You can think about it once you go through these slides and think about the answers of these questions. So this is the first question. Coal consumption of a country is approximately 140 MMT. If coal price goes up from $100 to $120 and the price elasticity of demand is minus 0.25, then what would be the percentage change in coal consumption? So this question pertains to own price elasticity, own price demand elasticity. You can clearly see the hint is like this. You can clearly see that the increase in price is 20%. So 100 to 120. So a 20% increase in price is leading to some X% decrease in the demand for coal, so that the resultant elasticity is 0.025. So you have to figure out what is this X, what is the percentage decline in coal. See, the sign is negative. So one thing when the price is increasing, the demand is decreasing, and that is pretty much usual when you are talking about own price elasticity. The second question, this is relevant to policy making. Gasoline in Iran is highly subsidized, leading to a low price of gasoline and a very high consumption. But if you have high consumption of gasoline, this leads to environmental pollution and emission of carbon dioxide. Now the question is that, do you think, how do you actually reduce the consumption of gasoline in Iran? Do you think that if there is a removal of subsidy, that is going to reduce the consumption as well? Because if the subsidy is removed, then there will be an increase in price, and whether you feel that is going to reduce the demand or not. Now, you can use the concept of elasticity in order to understand this particular issue. You can explain how this problem can be dealt with if you understand the concept of elasticity. The third one, In a study of industrial energy demand, if energy and capital are found to be complements, how do you interpret the result? So you can actually go back to the discussion in the previous lecture when we were talking about the substitution between capital and energy when you are installing energy efficient technologies or you are reducing your energy intensity, and that can give you a direction how to answer this particular question. So we are going to stop here for this lecture. In the next lecture, we are going to discuss about the decomposition analysis. That is again another very useful analytical tool in order to understand the energy demand. Thank you.